morning, everybody. First of all, I want to thank Laura, thank Jane for putting us together. I've had the pleasure of meeting some people that take part in this project, both on the Indian side of the project and in the Croatian side of the project. But I had I just met Laura, and so it's a pleasure to be here with you. So I'm very thankful for this opportunity. You're aware that the topic that I'm going to talk about is a controversial topic. So different analysts will obviously have different interpretations. So I'm basically going to discuss the recent trends in Brazilian politics. So my interpretation, so to say, is based in different researches, which I'm not mentioned, but which have been published both in articles and in different books. And I want to draw your attention particularly to a book that is coming out in English precisely this week, which has a chapter on Brazil, which is called, it's been translated as Power and Importance, the history of South America and the progressivism. So my talk draws a lot from the Brazilian chapter on that case. So I'll just, since there are people from Brazil and I'll just circulate so that you can see. So what is the starting point of my talk? My question is, how is the Brazilian elite attempting to construct hegemony in a conjuncture of crisis? And why do I say there is a crisis? I would say there's a threefold crisis on the social front, economic front, and political front. Like the starting point of the social crisis would be the June 2013 rebellion, which was the largest massive uprising that Brazil has experienced since the end of dictatorship in the 80s. Then a political crisis is related to the so-called car wash operation, which has unleashed a sequence of arrests of major political figures in Brazil, which include former President Lula. And it is an operation whose effects, which is still going on and whose political effects have not been fully measured. And an economic crisis because Brazil has been in recession since 2015. So my main hypothesis within this general context is that we are witnessing a transition in the framework that underpins capital reproduction in Brazil. This shift can be summarized in two ideas. There has been a shift from what I will call inclusive neoliberalism to a social dispossession, and that amounts to a shift on the political strategy, a shift from conciliation to class confrontation. So this is the general framework of my reading. So, and overall, this shift threatens the institutionality or the institutions associated with the 1988 Constitution, which is known in Brazil as the Citizens' Constitution, considered to be the founding stone of the so-called New Republic. We call in Brazil New Republic the period that started with the end of dictatorship in 1985. So seen in a broader perspective, we're advancing towards what Christian Laval, French sociologist, among many other analysts, has called as a new liberalism, perceived as a new liberalism, where contradictions between capitalism and democracy are aggravated. So new liberalism, in general terms, this new liberalism enforces economic violence through an anti-popular and anti-social economic agenda, and political violence as it undresses itself from its liberal democratic content. I think the Indian colleagues will not find very difficult to understand what I'm referring to. So, seen from a political angle, I understand that this is the background against which we should analyze the defenestration of the PT between Rousseff's impeachment in 2016 and Lula's arrest last year, as well as the election of Bolsonaro. I will analyze this process through three moments. First, the demise of the PT, the election of Bolsonaro, and then the new government's agenda. So how to explain the needs of the PT? PT administrations relied on class conciliation as a path to reform Brazilian capitalism. It was a reasonable premise given the acute inequalities that characterize our country. So the premise was that much could be done to solve these inequalities without facing the structures that reproduce them. So the Zero Hunger program, whose leadership was initially given to a Catholic friar, summed up this approach. After all, who would be opposed to ending hunger? In this context, the Lulista, what I'll be calling the Lulista way of regulating social conflict, can be summarized as a combination of modest gains for the lower ends of the Brazilian social pyramid, with the dominance of banks and international capital who, as always, continue to handle the country as merchandise. The combination of small gains for the poor, pursued either through the extension of cash transfer policies or by a slight evolution of the minimum wage, which was conditioned to the growth of the Brazilian economy. So the combination of those with the usual profits for the upper class created a relative social pacification of the country, which lasted for more than a decade. Lula was first elected in 2002. According to my colleague Rui Braga, this Lulista hegemony relied on the articulation of two distinct but complementary forms of consent. First was the passive consent of the subaltern classes. At the same time, the government concretely articulated the interests of intellectual sectors, of the trade union bureaucracy, as well as the leaders of the social movements, creating the basis of an active consent to Lula's, whose locus was the state apparatus. The denouement of this passive consensus to the Lulista Pact became evident precisely in the June 2013 demonstrations, which I've already referred to, which was, as I mentioned, the largest cycle of popular mobilization since the end of dictatorship in '85. So, to put it graphically, from the standpoint of let's say, the ruling class, how did the PT emerge into politics in the 80s? The PT emerged into politics by putting people on the streets. How did it reach power in the following decade? It did so by taking people off the streets. The June protests showed that the party had no more power to either put people or take them off the streets, which for many, or which from the standpoint of those from above, put their role in question. In June 2013 opened a new political conjuncture, marked by the exhaustion of this Lulista way of regulating social conflict. In the following years, as I've mentioned, corruption scandals, which were politically manipulated through the car wash operation, and portrayed as spectacles by the corporate media, were coupled with an economic crisis, which turned into a recession in 2015. Thus, the scope for class reconciliation was narrowed, creating more pressure for an updating of the accumulation regime. So the PT version of inclusive neoliberalism gave way to social dispossession, with the era of conciliation, while the era of conciliation slid into class warfare. Although this process was initiated under Rousseff herself, you should be aware that Rousseff was re-elected in 2014. When she started her second term, she immediately adopted what was the agenda of her main opponent, who was defeated in those same elections. So although this agenda was already initiated by Rousseff herself, the inflection was consummated with her deposition, with her impeachment, and then deepened with Lula's prison and Bolsonaro's election in the fall. So seen from that prism, Rousseff's impeachment in 2016 is part of the crisis of this so-called Lulista way of mode of regulating social conflict, as was Lula's arrest. As the dominant class approach to social reproduction shifted to the right, the PT presidencies lost their functionality and Lulaism became anachronic. Anachronic, again, from the standpoint of those from above, the ruling class. So in sum, I understand that recent trends in Brazil, or in Brazilian politics, should not be perceived as a radical 180 degrees turn, but rather as a kind of a metastasis of the PT administrations, in the sense that this very same anti-popular interest, which seemed to be contained, but were never previously faced under the PT, now spread and impacted. So agribusiness, finance, corporate media, new Pentecostalism, the military, and the list would go on. So they were always there, but they seem to be contained. Now they seem to be spread and grow the whole of the social fabric of the Brazilian society as a whole. Since Temer was the vice president of Rousseff, who took charge after her impeachment in 2016. So since Temer's short government, the corrupt professionals who secured the governability of the PT, starting with Temer himself, ceased to play the role of extras and took over the state. In short, the exhaustion of Lulism depleted the mediations between the predatory designs of the Brazilian bourgeoisie and the rights and aspirations of workers. Temer's anti-popular and unpopular government should be seen against this background, as is the case with Bolsonaro's election. However, beyond Lulism and Bolsonarism, there is evidence that this trend toward a new neoliberalism points to the myth of the new republic itself. This was noticeable in the 2018 presidential elections in China. So what was at stake on the recent elections? For the ruling class, the economy was not at stake, it was not in dispute. The winner would confront the problems of neoliberalism with more neoliberalism, whether through the utopian way of an inclusive neoliberalism reached by the PT, or through the ultra-neoliberalism of the Tucans, which are the historical opponents of the PT. So, ultra-neoliberalism of the Tucans or Bolsonaro. What the ruling class was contesting was the political form of management of the Brazilian crisis. In other words, the face of the institutional, legal, and cultural arrangement that will replace the new republic, which seems to be definitively condemned. In summary, two different approaches, two different ways were offered to manage this colossal Brazilian crisis. The PT offered order through conversation, while Bolsonaro proposed order through violence. With the likelihood of electing any of the three presidential candidates that clearly represented capital in those elections. So I should notice that the 2018 elections were typified by the variety of candidates that were disputing the presidency. It was the first time that it happened, so since the first election within the new republic, which was in 1988. In all elections between those elected, the polls were polarized by the PT and the Tucans. So we could say that, to state it briefly, Capital had three clear candidates for Brazilians to Amoedo, Meirelles, and Alckmin. But with the likelihood of electing any of these three presidential candidates, which they all summed up less than 9% of the votes in the first round, the question which arose was which of these routes was preferable to those from above, preferable to Capital. So if the PT won, it would be a problem to govern. The dilemma would be how to get this link of anti-PTism back in the hole. How to convince those who called for Lula's impeachment and for his imprisonment, which since then became a truly social movement, took the streets, by the way. How to convince that all this would end up in PT back to the presidency 2 years later. With Bolsonaro winning, the problem is for the government. His base among the powerful is fragile, his level of rejection is high, and his character is unpredictable. The question is, who will discipline the disciplinary? PT and Bolsonaro were envisaged as provisional and necessarily unstable responses of a ruling class in a state of reorganization. However, the direction of this upper class movement is clear. It is toward Bolsonaro. For the end of the new republic also compromised the Tucans. The ideal of the ruling class, I would say, is a Bolsonarism without Bolsonaro. In France, Marine Le Pen complains of those who came together to defeat her in the second round, because then someone was elected who implements her policies but without bragging. So my understanding is that beneath the dust of elections, the Brazilian ruling class forges its Macron, searching for Emmanuel Macron. Between the collapse of Lula's, which began in the rebellion of June 2013, and a trustworthy Bolsonarism that is in the oven, the ruling class is updating itself. This reordering was expressed in the dispersion of candidates, which I just referred to. As in 1989, when the new republic began, the ruling class searches for a path, but this time to bury it. So again, in 1989, just for the sake of comparison, there were 22 different candidates. 5 of them were truly competitive candidates, and the outcome was that Lula was narrowly defeated by Collor de Mello, who was also a very unstable term, which, by the way, was shortened by an impeachment process 2 years later. However, the future under Bolsonaro is imponderable. Many have supported him to get rid of the PT, but who will then free Brazil from him? The Christian Democrats supported this 1973 coup in Chile in order to return to the presidency, which in fact happened, however, 17 years later. And this comparison is not, I will come back to the comparison with Chile later on. There is no novelty in the adherence of those from above to Bolsonaro. Although he is brute and vulgar, the violence he embodies is first and foremost class violence. The drama is the adhesion of those from below. In the absence of the charismatic leader, the subproletariat that sustained Lula is shifted to Bolsonaro, except in the northeast of the country. Every Brazilian, and I'm sure everybody here knows, every Brazilian knows someone or many people who once voted for Lula and now voted for the candidate. Lula was in prison, but those who voted were not. So what happened? Discarding the hypothesis that all who voted for Bolsonaro are fascists or were manipulated against the PT, this result suggests the uncomfortable hypothesis that Bolsonarism is, we could say, a B-side of Lulaism, not exactly its contrary. It is true that the anti-PTism has poisoned the debate, but several candidates wielded this banner. A man of old-time politics, Bolsonaro sold himself as new. The secret may have been form rather than content. The captain uses the language of brutality, which a brutalized people know and understand. In a perverse way, he talks with people, like Lula. In the process, he differentiated himself from the regular candidates. So if Lula emerged as a messiah, Bolsonaro became a myth. He became known, and he's currently known as the myth. Always in a fake fashion, Bolsonaro projected himself to be on the side of those who, like him, do not articulate ideas very well, or don't understand many things. He defended a specifically constructed set of values, not a program. Hence, the fluid dialogue with the evangelicals, which was a key factor in these recent elections. The PT campaign, in turn, bet on Lula's victimization and then on making him the candidate behind the candidate, when it proved impossible that Lula himself was the candidate, and the idea was that Lula was the candidate behind Haddad eventually became the candidate. But this option was only assumed 1 month before the polls actually, the election actually took place. And that was just after Bolsonaro was stabbed. Because when Bolsonaro was stabbed, I don't know if you've got word of this outside Brazil, but then Bolsonaro was in a position to dispute the victim place with Lula himself. So Lula intended to turn the elections into a plebiscite on himself. To state it bluntly, he dreamt of becoming a Mandela. In the process, the party contributed to depoliticizing the dispute and displacing the dispute into moral grounds. So while the PT campaign branded itself around the concept of justice, the main value evoked by Bolsonaro was order, which for him means concluding the unfinished work of the dictatorship. He has stated that often. Maybe this is, after all, his program. But what is Bolsonaro's program concretely? now that he's in charge. He offers the framework of neoliberalism, which is the police state. But he does not have the content, which he then outsources. And outsources to whom? To state shortly to big capital. This was the message behind his apparently naive behavior during the campaign, when he turned down every question on economics, claiming that such issues would be addressed by his economic ministry, who, by the way, is a Chicago guy. We'll get to that later. And then, so then the question becomes, what is the capital aiming to? It's aiming to change the framework on which capital reproduction operates in Brazil. So a set of reforms against workers are being advanced, while they have abandoned any expectation of international protagonism, which had its last incarnation under the PT governments, the idea of a powerful Brazil, of Brazil Potência. This shift is illustrated by the attitude of the militaries themselves. In the past, the military associated their power with the industrialization of the country, which, by the way, started and consolidated between two dictatorships, the so-called Estado Novo, the new state between 37 and 46, and the later dictatorship between 64 and 85. Faced with industrial regression and social degradation, the military threw in the towel, giving up the dreams of a powerful Brazil, which was their slogan, by the way. They roll up their sleeves for an armed management of social life, aiming to hold up a country that is falling apart. They place their bets on a privileged relationship with the United States in a context of a global save yourself if you can trajectory. So here's an illustration of the trend. Lula, when he was president, he sent the General Augusto Heleno to lead the United Nations mission in Haiti. This was part of his project of making Brazil a global player. The general then returned to Brazil thinking about how to prevent Brazil of becoming a Haiti. Barred from being Bolsonaro's vice president by his party, General Heleno now uses his experience acquired in Haiti as director of the Institutional Security Office in the current government, who, by the way, responds directly to the presidency. So where do reforms, this set of reforms in which are ongoing set of reforms, where do they point to? They point to overcome the institutionality which is associated with the citizens' constitution. It is not a coincidence that Bolsonaro's strong economy minister is a former Chicago boy who worked in Chile under Pinochet in the 80s. That's where he got. So he was in Chile when the pension system reform was implemented in Chile in the 80s. So Chile is his basic inspiration. And this ministry called Paulo Guedes, he despises as leftish every economic policy which has been implemented since the end of Brazilian dictatorship. He puts them all together. The Tucans and the PT as all being leftish because of so-called state interventionism. So Bolsonaro's source of inspiration is clearly Pinochet's Chile, a regime that reframed Chilean society in a comprehensive way, a totalitarian way, if you will. I don't have the time to go into details. The specific chapter on Chile in the book that I've referred does that. But the key issue is that Chile's fundamentalist and pioneering neoliberal experience in economics went hand in hand with the effects of this project on the political sphere and on subjectivity in a broader sense. It is a neoliberal utopia, we could say. I don't know if everybody's aware, but the Chilean dictatorship was peculiar in the South American, Latin American context, not because of its brutality, but because it was a pioneering experience of implementing neoliberalism, but in a very radical fashion, in the sense that many of the programs that were implemented there through the 70s and the 80s were pioneering as far as in the world scene, not only for as far as Latin America is concerned. And, well, we can discuss Chile later. This Chilean agenda has two key targets in Brazil. But before saying that, so that I understand that Paulo Guedes convinced Bolsonaro to adopt this program, not because of this of his economic agenda, because Bolsonaro comes, he has this military background, which in Brazil was historically associated with state interventionism and industrialization of the country. I'm convinced that he caught Bolsonaro because of the social and political effects of this agenda. The social and political effects which this agenda had in Chile, which until 2 months ago was widely perceived as a successful experience, not only of neoliberalism, but of pacification, of social dismantling of every possibility of social resistance. Just to give you a quick word of what this means, the Socialist Party that elected Salvador Allende in the 70s, Salvador Allende was deposed then in Chile, September 11, in 73. This very same Socialist Party came back to power in the 2000s, but then as managers of neoliberalism, so they were completely deprived of anything that they have been before. So I can imagine Paulo Guedes arguing with Bolsonaro, saying, look at this. This is the perfect. So with the left like that, we don't even have to care about going after leftists. So this Chilean agenda has two key targets in Brazil. On the economic front was the economic system, the pension system reform. On the political front, dismantling the public education system, particularly public universities. This second one is primarily a political issue, although presented as an economic one, because as savings with the university system are of little relevance considering the national budget. But the thing is that the university is one of the few environments where free criticism or activities like this one that can still take place, can happen. And the benchmark in both fronts is Chile under Pinochet. The pension system reform showcases what I'm referring to when I say an attack against the citizen constitution. Why? Because the key argument is that the system has a huge deficit which will explode in the coming years. However, there is no deficit when you consider the social security system as such, conceived by the Constitution, which implies contributions from workers, also from employers through different compulsory contributions, and the state. What actually happens is that the Brazilian state has not been meeting its duty, as every year more resources are channeled, or we could say deviated, to meet debt interests, that is, to meet financial demands. So to sell the idea that the system has a deficit and is bleeding, numbers presented show workers' contributions against pension system expenses as such. They just disregard the whole structure that was actually is the constitutional structure, the current constitutional structure. So they just ignore all the resources which are asserted in the Constitution. That is, they present the picture according to a different rationale, which is the Chilean rationale, which is the rationale that they intend to implement. This new rationale implies a departure from a social security system to a situation where individuals are accountable for their choices. A departure from state's agency or from society's agency to individual responsibility. So if you're safe and if you choose right, you'll be taken care of. If you don't, it was your choice. So it's a departure from a collective rationale to an individual one, from social rights to a financial product. So the point is that the pension system reform implies a complete departure from the social reference that underpin the citizen constitution and the new republic as such. This was the hidden agenda of the pension system reform, to compromise the foundations of the citizen constitution. In the process, I should say, this reform, which was partially approved recently, will have devastating effects on the social fabric of the country, as 92% of the savings projected will be at the expense of those who earn 3 or less minimum wages. This will have a particularly devastating effect on the rural areas. Interestingly enough, the social effects of this agenda became evident in Chile just now. As you know, this this is a widespread rebellion, which is still going in Chile, which does not have a clear goal, clear target, although it was triggered by the hiking of transport fares. So, but it could be branded overall, it could be labeled as a rebellion against a society of despair, which was the legacy of this project, this Pinochet project. So to conclude, the question I posed was, how do Brazilian elites attempt to construct hegemony in a conjuncture of crisis? There has been a clear shift in recent years. In Brazil, we seem to have updated ourselves. I remember I take part on a discussion with Greek colleagues, so with Indian, people from Russia, from China, and we always seem to be doing better off compared to. So I think we're catching up like with Modi's and India. So we're updating ourselves, moving from this inclusive neoliberalism to social dispossession, in tune with the global trend that has been described as this, by Laval, as this new liberalism, where the contradictions between democracy and capitalism are being aggravated. This is the general discussion. So this is.
Well, thank you very much, Fabio. It's an excellent exposition. You did very complete versus tracing analysis, very impressive. So I think you can take advantage of the fact that we are in international group and put in a comparative perspective. Because the emergence of white is same phenomenon with different contexts. So Fabio talked about Chile and the source of the phenomenon in Brazil. But we can talk again also about different perspective from US and Europe, comparing the Brazilian case. So I open with this provocation to Fabio and audience, and then open for questions. Please. Just to emphasize, my question is how so many different contexts produce the same phenomenon. Leaders, right wings, people with certain similar in terms of agenda, political agenda. So how it can happen. So please.
So thank you, Fabio. For calling a spade a spade. It's very refreshing to hear you because too often we find that these issues are sort of lost in some kind of miasma of theory. So thank you very much for that very frank and upright approach to what's happening in Brazil. In fact, Ulbe this morning talked about how everything that was happening in the world of social media and feminist movements was exact mirror of what was happening in India, and I got the same impression hearing you, because it seems that much of what you are describing is exactly what has been happening over the last 8 to 10 years in India. With the rise of the right wing and the kind of social dispossession that you're talking about, particularly with regard to social welfare scheme, particularly with regard to how the economy is collapsing, primarily because the state is actually underwriting a big business. The funds are all being channeled in that direction. Money doesn't exist anymore for social welfare. So I was just wondering, the question which he was raising, how do we understand this in a global perspective? Because all the time we keep talking about it. There is Trump, there is Boris Johnson, and there is Bolsonaro here, and then there is, everywhere you look in the world, there is a rise of these populist right-wing leaders. How do we understand it in a global context? Because obviously our histories are different, our social, political developments are coming from very different kinds of contexts in some sense. How is it that in the first 2 decades of the 21st century, we suddenly seem to have been documenting a similar kind of trajectory? I'm sure all of you know this, that Bolsonaro is going to be the chief guest at the Republic Day celebrations in India, which is a huge, huge honor. He's Modi's personal friend. And you can also sort of make out why there's this kind of bonhomie which is stretching across the country.
Por favor, professora.
My question, that's very interesting, both of you, the global perspective. I also want to add a question, but related to the specifically Brazilian case, which is the relation between corruption and Lava Jato. And I see both things as separate and not exactly the same, because my question is, how do you, Fabio, see, do you see the Lava Jato as an operation that was politically motivated to a degree that it wouldn't have existed if it weren't politically motivated? How do you see the issue of corruption, which is the big let's say, argument? The argument is corruption. Let's get rid of the PT because of corruption, and so as if they were the only corrupt. On the other hand, how can you analyze, the relation between corruption? To what degree is it real? To what degree is it fabricated? And to what degree is the Lava Jato and the impeachment process and all this based on something completely false? Or are there elements? So here you've outlined a very interesting and critical analysis of how the PT let the situation slide in to the victory of Bolsonaro. But you didn't speak about corruption in this. You spoke about structural aspects, and how about this argument? Where does that fit into your analysis?
Let's take one more and then
Thanks for a really fascinating paper. And what I thought was a strength of your paper was how you presented Bolsonaro as a symptom of certain events that have happened. And what I would like to know, and perhaps it connects in a little bit with the question about how do we answer this globally, is it's not clear to me at all who the ruling elite is. Who are they? And is this? I think this is something that is a global issue, and I think it's really fascinating to discover, because I wasn't aware of it, that there's this Chilean agenda afoot in Brazil that goes back to the Chicago School, and it's Milton Friedman, right? So this is perhaps also, because I find in an awful lot of analyses of what's happening politically, there isn't a proper fundamental economic analysis of what's going on and how this, what you portrayed at the start, the lower end of the pyramid get just enough in the modest gains to sort of shut them up, but also to dismantle them from having the power to organise, perhaps when it becomes really, really critical. So the practice of social protest goes missing, when it becomes really critical, when we are where we are. But who is this ruling elite in Brazil? Who are they? Well, Bolsonaro and Modi.
let's do you want to respond and then you give the floor back to you again, please.
I'll do my best to be brief. I think when we look to different contexts, we're always looking at similarities and differences. I would say that one thing that struck me, and obviously this is the reason I've been going to India and doing research, because I think there's lots to be compared between these two circumstances. One thing that strikes me in the Indian context is the Sanparivar. Like the feeling that I had, which I'd like to go deeper into it when I go back there, is that the roots on subjectivity of values, culture that underpins, let's say, the Modi, this politics of hate in the Indian context, they seem to me to be more ingrained as opposed to the Brazilian case, because of the capillarity of this Sanparivar and all this, how this has been built through decades. This is my impression from as an outsider. So in that sense, I would say that in Brazil, to that point, I think that my sense is that things are much more in dispute, contested. I'll give you an example regarding relating to the previous discussion on genders. Eloisa mentioned that just before the first round of elections, there was this massive demonstration led by women under the hashtag Not Him, and it was probably the most massive popular citizenship demonstration in Brazil after dictatorship, discounting June 2013, obviously. And it was a very touching, moving demonstration. Those who were there, I think everybody would agree with me. And at that point, those who were on those demonstrations, I think we were sure that he would not pass. However, what happened is that that demonstration was actually twisted, particularly through WhatsApp, by the campaign of Bolsonaro as an assault against values of the family. So they would portray, for example, women showing their breasts or women kissing another woman as if that was like what the demonstration, the manifestation was about. And they would circulate all those images. So that actually what the statistics actually show is that support for Bolsonaro actually grew after that. So do you see what I mean? It's a paradox apparently, because it was a massive, sensitive demonstration, but the political effect and the way that it was manipulated, or the way that it was played by by Bolsonaro's campaign in its very aftermath was just so. But the point that I want to make is that in my understanding is that you have both strong. You have them both. You have the anti, let's say, this conservative social agenda, but you also have the strength of these people that went on they took the street 1 week before the post. They are there as well. So it will not be easy to go against all those people who took the street in the. So I'm referring particularly to the gender issue, but I think this could be expanded to other issues. So in this sense, that I think that in India, I think it's a bit different. Like I was there when there was like the tension with Pakistan because of the bombing in Kashmir in the beginning of the year, and I was very, to a sense, scared and also impressed to see how little there was reaction in the sense of an anti-war, of an anti-bomb, and like the discourse of hatred was just dominant. Right? So it was like everyone who would be for peace would be labeled as anti-national. So I think, in this sense, I think that Brazil is different. But again, talking about the contradictions of this process, and I will come back to the corruption. But let's remember. So, what was the key social actor? At least this is what is being suggested by researchers, which are still in an incipient stage at this point. But what was the key actor of this shift that this not in demonstrations actually turned into votes for Bolsonaro? It was the evangelicals. That's what it's been suggested so far. The point that I want to make is just to make it very brief, is that this very same evangelicals, which is a broad social, like there's many denominations, many contradictions between them. So I'm not going to go into all this, but as a generalization, we must remember that they were all part of Lula's, of the PT's base of support throughout this bonanza, this boom years. So that they all voted for the PT. Even Bolsonaro voted for Lula in the second round of 2003 elections. We should remember that. So this is part of what I mean when I talk about the cancer metaphor, the metastasis. Like they were there, but the evangelicals were with them. Now they turned against them. And then one of the consequences of having the evangelicals with them was that this has blocked advances on a gender egalitarian agenda. For instance, one very known example among Brazilians is the so-called the fight against homophobia on schools. That was simply or the legalization of abortion. The legalization of abortion. This was they were just never put forward, because this would obviously would be very sensitive, would go against these social sectors which were part of the supporters of this government. So my understanding, very shortly, on the corruption, obviously the car wash operations were politically manipulated. Everybody in Brazil knows that. But the many names and politicians, big politicians that surfaced within the investigations, there was only the Workers' Party politicians, or mostly Workers' Party politicians, were prosecuted, and Lula's arrest was a completely illegal from the standpoint of what the judicial procedures are to be considered. So I think this is not a question. However, they also, my understanding, in very broad words, is that these investigations, they run out of control, in the sense that of the scale that the investigations acquired, and the depth to which it exposes how corruption is ingrained in the way that Brazilian business works. We could say by hypothesis, capitalist business works. So part of my understanding, I cannot go deep into that part of the huge effort to contain the effects of this operation are the deals that are being struck from above that ultimately led, for example, to the releasing of Lula. So let's make it clear. I'm sorry, this is not a very popular stand, but this is spade, as we call it a spade. So the PT became like the left side of the order, the left branch of order, let's say. And this is a corrupt order. So yes, I very much believe that the Mensalão scandal was real, that they were paying those deputies. Like, I think there's no denying that. They were just playing the game, and then the game turned against themselves. And their complaint is that, why only me? Eh? So as the scandals and investigations are just spreading out of control, everybody, and when I say spreading out of control, it's because they're reaching also Bolsonaro's sons. So a deal is being Lula did not go out of jail because of popular pressure. This is the reality. And I think that the core issue on these arrangements that are being discussed and dealt with is how to stop this like it's like you an anatomy course, like you just open this rotten body of what Brazilian business and the intersection between business and politicians, and so they just want to cover that back again, take the body out of the way, and just move on to business as usual. But the PT is part of the deal. That's what I wanted to. And obviously, the another side of it is that the scandals have been portrayed as it was just a political, as if the agency was of the state and not of the business, which are the ones who actually do who are the ones that start or who promote corruption. So just to very quickly, who the really elite is, to say very simply, this is also it's an issue that raises many discussions, particularly in an undeveloped country, or let's say a third world country, a dependent country as Brazil, because then you have to talk about whether you have a national bourgeoisie or not, and what about the autonomy of the dominant ruling class. So, but to put it very briefly, I would say I'm talking about business, and business is firstly finance, then it's agribusiness, and then let's say evangelical churches, extractivism in general, like not only agro, but also the mineral exploitation, and this which is being pursued either by national capital or by Brazilian transnationalized capital or by transnational corporations as such, including Indian capital ones. So This is what I would call, and again, I think they had the Chilean utopia, and the Chilean utopia points to what you just mentioned, like that the demobilizing, ultimately is the demobilizing social effect of this radical neoliberal agenda, which had produced it in Chile. Now we're provoked to, to see that again through a different angle because of what's happening in Chile.
So you can get new wave of questions. Just one wave of 3 questions. We have about 10 minutes. So there and you and the you and there. That's it.
There is one more we can take.
One
Yeah,
more.
sure, please.
Oh, you do.
The answer needs to be shorter in that case.
I'll ask the
Probably. Okay. So please.
You pose a very provocative and a fantastic question. Who disciplined the disciplinarian? I wonder, have you come across in, not just your examples in Brazil, but further afield, any positive examples of disciplinary action with a positive and sustainable follow-up? So not just the action of discipline, but a positive and sustainable action after that.
Please.
I want to say a little bit about the international aspect of this, the shock doctrines that Naomi Klein speaks about, and these scale strategies of destabilizing Latin America as a whole in a new cycle of this colonial modernity to the development and intensification of technologies of information communication. Brazil, now you have the same ambassador that went to Paraguay, Honduras, and Brazil that would specialize in regime change, and then after the impeachment came another ambassador that is specialized in conflict after regime change. And the Bolsonaro came to a specific strategy that moralized the public arena. So everybody's talking about moral conflicts, but behind he's selling the oil, the Petrobras, the Embraer, and it's also to dismantleize the BRICS agreement. From Modi and Bolsonaro leave China and Russia alone. We have the Pepe Escobar, he's a journalist from Brazil. He specializes in talking about these aspects of global regime change. And the corruption comes through the textbook for regime change. The Lava Jato, the car wash had training from CIA specialists before the organization. We have the WhatsApp campaign. We have a lot of IPs from foreign countries, especially Florida, United States. In Bolivia now we have 1 million of these troops. And in Brazil we have like the national intelligence. We have his internet modems in a private server in Texas. Stratford is a big thing of the. And I just want to put this interference of the international capital that sometimes is leave it alone, but after 2008 and the subprime crisis, it came like a rolling ball that puts Latin America again in a state of colonial. That's so about what she said. They have the military as the vice president, and he kept with the Supreme Court as well, always treating the subjects that comes to the juridical court.
I just wanted to ask about where you see the political centre. You spoke about the various centre-right or right-wing candidates being very much of the same coin. We saw some candidates like Marina Silva, Ciro Gomez, who are not PT, but could perhaps have represented a centre-left alternative, but their vote collapsed in the weeks before the election. Do you see space there for an evolution towards a political centre ground?
I can respond that, no. Luis, você queria? Não? Aqui, do you
Yeah,
see the
my question was about public universities. Again, coming from India, we are facing a big crisis, including in jail, which you know well. My question was whether, is it something more than, are universities attacked? Is it something more than that these are spaces for free expression and a certain kind of person? Or is it more than that? Is it that since you're talking about capital and different stages of capitalism, that now knowledge is a very determining key factor as a factor of production in the way that, capital was earlier. And that the control over knowledge, with coming in different ways, with the colonialized, recolonialized curriculums, putting down, so Western universities with their offshore campuses everywhere. So it's very big. It's something more than that. It's something very central to the way that we are of a new stage of capital.
You have 5 minutes.
Okay. 5 minutes.
Who will discipline the disciplinary? You must know that the current minister, he gave an interview during the campaign, and then his argument, I quote this argument in the chapter about Brazil. He says that I cannot understand our ruling class because now we have this animal who can get as many votes as the other one, but he wants to make our agenda. Why don't we give him a chance? And then he says, it's very simple. We have to tame the animal. He uses these very words. So it was very clear what was what was at stake for for the ruling class and how to tame. So if you talk to anybody who worked, for example, in a bank and ask them if they like Bolsonaro, they're not going to say they do. They're going to say he's horrible, the things they say, he's all outrageous, but he's getting right on the economy. That's what it is. It's pretty much the Chilean rationale when you think about the Pinochet years. So my understanding is that there's no way to discipline the disciplinarian. However, my understanding is that what they're looking for is, as I said, a Bolsonarism without Bolsonaro. And there are many. To the Brazilians, I could say that for João Dória, an alternative, Sérgio Moro, which is the Minister of Justice, was another one. Luciano Huck is another. They're looking for. However, Bolsonaro has his own plans. Like they put him, as I said, like some people like this, Christian Democrats in Chile in '73 supported most of them, not all of them, and supported the coup, thinking that they will come next, which they actually did 17 years later. So there is a high degree of unpredictability also on what's going on in Brazil because he has an agenda of his own. But as a rule, he's not the man that the ruling class wants. The agenda is the shock doctrine. So Pedro, basically. To say briefly, I don't think obviously Latin America, Brazil, have always been the influence of the U.S. is always a major and something that has to be acknowledged on every since the end of the 19th century. However, I don't think this is the main drive on the what you've called as regime changes. Both either in Brazil or in other cases that we've been. Sorry?
This question of hybrid warfare.
I think practically, specifically this hybrid warfare, I think this is rationalization of it has been mobilized by, let's say, sympathizers of Lucas Party government to draw people's attention towards as if everything was a conspiracy from the U.S. And this specific book is crazy because it's written by somebody from Russia, who works for the Russians, which is a very repressive regime. Like you cannot let's say the left cannot have these people as references if you want to build a like make it a libertarian or democratic society in any sense. So I had very clear, for example, in the Paraguay context, I was studying there when the coup against Lula happened, so I saw it very clear. The United States, obviously, they're happy to have Bolsonaro instead of Lula, but they were never unhappy having Lula. And I also have quotes of different people from you study that much more than I. So they were never, there was never a contradiction. Like the idea that Munasor, you just had to listen to people like Paulo Nogueira Batista Jr. who worked on the BRICS and say, our goal was never to dispute the hegemony of the United States, but to get a better say into this world order. Like, those who don't see that, are people who want to make political use of what reality actually is. So this is it's not, again, Paulo Nogueira Batista Jr., this is not what these people say. About the political center, and just one quick word. So why was Dilma impeached? To say very briefly, she lost command of petty politics, of the parliament. It's as simple as that, which they commanded for successfully for 13 years. So but why did she lost command of this government? And people say because because of her temper, because no, the background of this is this shit that I've just mentioned, because the social, political, and economic aspects that changed from 2013 to 2015. This is the background of the loss of legitimacy of this released mode of regulation of social conflict. That's how she lost, the PT lost ground, but not because of the United States, or because there was another agenda who wants to depose the PT to impose their a completely different agenda. I think this is wishful thinking. About the political center, I have something to add. Very interesting question. I forgot your name. So
Barry.
Barry. My understanding is my first guess, and I wrote here, was exactly like I must say. There is no, just because there is this deep social science tradition in Brazil that sees that, or Latin American social science that sees in a country who is the pattern of class domination as such that the room for reform is so little, so narrow, that it pretty much amounts to no room. So it's either you either have to face structural constraints for change, or you are condemned to reproduction of the same, even if in a different, like, which I term as inclusive liberal. So this would, but I think, but I want to add something. I think that there are obviously many people disputing this middle. You mentioned some. I think for those who are looking for, who identify themselves with social change, there are no response. However, I think that the most interesting thing that's being contributed is the so-called Partido Novo. I think they may at some point try to dispute this place. They're the Bolsonaro which has not come out of the closet. That's my understanding. If you talk to people from the Novo Party or those who voted, they have exactly the same framework, the same set of values. But again, not with this dirty, vulgar rhetoric. So I will pay attention, and I have word from different angles that they are doing a very consistent, what we would call grassroots work, countrywide. About the university, my guess, Susheta, in Brazil, is that is even more, is more dramatic than that. I wish our universities were a key factor in knowledge production. My guess, again, is that these universities are becoming just irrelevant from the point of view. Look at this university that we are. When was it constructed? It was in the 30s, under what I've just mentioned, the first dictatorship in Estado Novo. It was a little before, but it was constructed. So it corresponded to a national project, a project of industrialization of the country, of building a country, building a nation. This is our nation. So this became just irrelevant. So how are they? Where are they? Their countries being formed? They're going out abroad. Like we're doing our internationalization, let's say from below, with different interests, but they. So to give you a personal example, my wife, which you met, she works also with like a youth counseling, people with, and she has some people who come from very high-paying schools here, and she has noticed that from some years now, they don't even pay attention in what we call like the vestibular, the process of getting into the public universities in Brazil. They're formed already looking abroad. It's only people there. So my worst fear is that we're just becoming disposable.
Please don't tell them everything, so they come back next year to listen to you again. Thank you very much.